openRxiv, and he's going to speak on building an open ecosystem around preprints.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Chief Science and Strategy Officer at openRxiv. Ramin, I think I'm Strategy Officer in the same sense of strategy that you mentioned earlier. As I said, I'm from openRxiv. There's a couple of points to this slide. One thing is we basically did last year what Archive is about to do in July, which is spin out a non-profit organization from a research institution, in our case, Cold Spring Harbor. But the key point is that it's still non-profit, and I'll kind of get to that part at the end, because I think it's really important in thinking about what we want to do in the future. But this is the scheme that we started off with back in 2013. Was the problem that anybody's familiar with in any form of academic science, but is pretty acute in biology and medicine, which is this is something I show to students every year. The point being that when you submit to a traditional journal in biology, 50% of the papers are immediately rejected by the editor without review. You have to run the gauntlet of the reviewers. If that goes well, you have to revise the paper. That's the slow step. That takes months and months and months. Then when the journal finally accepts the paper, it's generally behind a paywall. And the question is, in the era of the web, should we do it like that? I think we feel that the answer is no. Disseminate the work immediately on a preprint server so it's public, and then make a decision about whether you do all this, how you do all this, or whether you want to think a little bit differently about that. Obviously, we were inspired by Archive. I don't need to tell you about Archive. I'm sorry it says 2 million physicists can't be wrong. If you know the source of the joke, you'll understand why it has to begin with an F. But it works for mathematicians. But we're very much inspired by Archive, and so launched bioRxiv preprint server for biomedical sciences in 2013 at Cold Spring Harbor Lab. Free non-profit service, and all the papers were screened before they go live. That's not peer review. I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean. And as I said, we spun that out in 2025. It was interesting because it's clearly an idea of the time, because no sooner had we launched bioRxiv than this happened. There was this kind of explosion of multiple different archives across the space. But ChemArchive and SociArchive, I think, are pretty notable. EarthArchive. It's, again, clearly an idea of its time. It's just strange it took 25 years after Paul Ginsberg started Archive for everybody to have the idea, but it did happen. It's been pretty successful. And then in 2019, we created medRxiv. This was focused on clinical and health sciences, not biology. The big distinction here is that screening is enhanced because of concerns about misinformation in clinical information. The consequences of getting something wrong are more severe in actionable healthcare than basic biology. And this was a partnership with BMJ and clinicians in Yale. Again, I don't really need to tell you all this, but the benefits are clearly this rapid transmission of results, so people can build on the findings immediately. Free access. The publishing community's been arguing about how to create open access for 25, 30 years, and clearly preprints are the easiest and cheapest way to do it. So we wrote a paper called Plan U about that. Scientists get pre-publication feedback, which helps improve papers and make their research immediately available to grant and hiring committees rather than waiting for 2 years for it to appear in a fancy journal. And then and I guess this is what we'll talk about in the panel, is the extent to which this allows this decoupling of dissemination from its peer review and evaluation, and allows evolution of publishing, and allows us to think how science communication should work. This is just a kind of to make the quantitative point. In biomedical sciences, that blue plot is times of submission to publication for journals. And you'll see the median's around 7 months, but the range goes out beyond 2 years, as opposed to putting something on bioRxiv, which is typically 24 to 48 hours. And again, so the hypothesis is that early dissemination of research will speed up science. And so Steve Quaker, the BioHub in San Francisco, did some back-of-envelope calculations. And if you make certain assumptions about how ideas flow from experimental findings, you can get to a prediction that in 10 years you would speed up science fivefold if everybody shared their papers immediately rather than only after peer review. Of course, that's kind of like back of envelope calculations, all very hand wavy. And then came the pandemic when we really did have a demonstration of the proof of this concept. In 2003, when the SARS outbreak happened, 93% of the papers about that virus appeared after the outbreak had ended. Then when we had the Zika outbreak in 2016, we started seeing preprints in real time on bioRxiv as the outbreak was happening. Then came 2020. We had 30,000 papers on COVID on bioRxiv and medRxiv during the pandemic. These stemmed from the early epidemiological investigations showing waves of infection through China, Italy, and the US. What was interesting was we got concurrent waves of submissions from China, Italy, and the US. You could kind of track the pandemic by the papers that we were getting. Then lots of studies of viral biology, and then a real triumph again. And I think this is the key demonstration: the recovery trial that showed that dexamethasone was an effective treatment for severe COVID came out on medRxiv, and it came out a few months before it came out in the New England Journal of Medicine. So it's, as one medRxiv user said, it's absolutely true to say that there are people alive today who wouldn't have been because of preprints, because the results of this clinical trial were shared.
Can I interrupt you briefly? Was the New England Journal of Medicine okay with this?
Yeah, they kind of had to be. I think they probably saw that last statement coming. So. Yeah. And then another thing that I think really illustrated the importance of preprints was we saw on medRxiv and bioRxiv these sort of almost real-time results coming out of the different viral variants of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So you probably remember there was the alpha variant, beta, gamma, delta, and then we all got Omicron. But those waves moved pretty fast. So you had scenarios where a paper would come out on bioRxiv about the beta variant of SARS-CoV-2. By the time that paper went through peer review in a journal over 6 months, there was nobody left on the planet who had the beta variant of COVID because everybody then had Omicron. So it really illustrated the importance of that. This is just how our workflow works. I was talking whether it's a little different from arXiv. Every single paper is looked at by a human being. So the papers come in, they undergo some administrative checks, a bit like arXiv, and then a scientifically trained individual looks at the paper and decides if there's anything that we should worry about and flags it. These are the kinds of things that we're basically asking, is it really science? Is it nonsense? Is it non-science? Is it an actual paper? Is it research rather than opinion? We don't allow hypotheses and opinion. You couldn't really do that in math, but you can do it effectively in biology and medicine. Is it plagiarized? And is it dangerous? So that's the key thing about the higher guardrails on medRxiv. You do worry about things like if we had a paper, it was not long after we launched bioRxiv that we got papers saying that HIV does not cause AIDS. We wouldn't want to post a paper that says life-saving vaccines don't work. If we get a paper that says you don't need to take your antibiotics for the full course and can give up over 2 days, we will reject the paper, however good it looks. And then there's a growing issue around biosecurity risks, which in the in silico area with biological foundational models are a worry as we think about the ability for people to design more lethal and more virulent viruses. So screening is important, and we obviously hope that we can use LLMs to do that more effectively as we scale. That's just shows you what a paper looks like on bioRxiv. Again, a difference with arXiv is we're hosted on a commercial server. We have an independent hosting service, so we haven't built our technology to host. We use a service like many journals do. So again, that's a bit of a difference. I think all those things will be pretty familiar to you. So how are we doing? After 12 years, we have 400,000 preprints across bioRxiv and medRxiv. About 10 million people look at the site each month. 80% of papers go on to be published in journals, so it's the same universe as information pretty much. We're seeing fundamental mandates like Michael J. Fox Foundation, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and Gates Foundation are actually mandating that all their researchers should post papers as preprints, which is a big change in biology. I mean, it really was something that people thought would never be possible in biology. People thought it was somehow different from math and physics. And we're now seeing people putting preprints in job tenure and grant applications and seeing the benefits of that, getting into independent positions much, much earlier than they otherwise would have. As I said earlier, one of the things that we hope is that by decoupling this dissemination from peer review, we can promote evolution of the research system. So we can increase reproducibility, for example, by providing a venue that doesn't judge the importance of research, like high-quality journals tend to create context and discussion around preprints, improve discovery, and look to new tools to kind of do the things that journals did in the past. We've tried to ensure technological interoperability as much as possible, so you can do things like submit your paper to bioRxiv, and then when you finish, there's like more than 300 journals where you can just click which journal you want to go to, and all the files and metadata are sent through. A number of journals do it in the other direction, where you can submit to a journal, know it's going to take a long time, just press a button and they say, we'll put it on bioRxiv for you. This is just a kind of nice example of reproducibility. Because biology journals have frequently suffered from not wanting to post things that aren't interesting or novel or different, it's been very difficult for scientists to post work that refutes other work. But because bioRxiv and medRxiv don't judge the quality of the research, we've seen some great examples. The one on the left's a bit in the weeds, but I do like this example here on the right. This is a paper in PNAS where Craig Venter, who you probably remember from the Human Genome Project, had an organization, and he claimed that he could take your genome sequence and predict what you looked like from your genome sequence. And within 7 hours, the same day, Yanni Verlick at the New York Genome Center said, no, you can't. He basically showed that what Craig was doing was predicting your ethnicity from your genome sequence, and then showing a picture of what the average person of that ethnicity looked like. But I think it gets to the point that the preprint service really allowing self-correction within the scientific community more effectively. We've also seen, because of this decoupling, new peer review, independent peer review venues emerge. So pre-review, review commons, and PCI are essentially portable peer review services. So they don't do all the things that the journal does, they just do the peer review bit because the article's already on the preprint server. And this became important in the pandemic with things like Preprint Club and RRID, which is an MIT initiative that were doing very rapid peer review of papers as they came out on bioRxiv and medRxiv, and they've continued after the pandemic to do it in a broader sense. We can show these peer reviews using web annotation technology. So what you see on the left is a bioRxiv paper. At the bottom right, where it says reviews and context, that's a widget. And if you click peer reviews, the web annotation window comes up and shows a journal peer review in the right-hand panel. And the critical thing there is that the decoupling is preserved, because that right-hand panel is controlled entirely by eLife, the journal, and it's associated with the left-hand panel, which is hosted on bioRxiv. So I think it's good, and you can see what we like to think of as trust signals accruing around information. This is another example where you have a bioRxiv paper on the left, and the author has made an assertion that there is data and code associated with the paper. That is actually on a different repository, Dryad, curate and verify the data, and then you get a green tick alongside the link on bioRxiv that shows that this actually is a curated and verified data set, not merely just some random URL which may or may not be relevant data. So I think from our point of view, I think this gets to kind of what we think scientific articles could look like in the future. There's sometimes a tendency at publishing venues for somebody to present this kind of super futuristic article that kind of is all singing, all dancing, and does loads of wonderful things. But the reality is that things like data tend to exist in dedicated repositories with dedicated functionality. So PDB, the protein database, is where big crystal structures that you're never going to embed in a paper exist. We can link to them from bioRxiv, MRIs, nucleic acid sequences at NCBI. There's a whole bunch of repositories that we connect with, and then you can see downstream events where the work is evaluated by peer review, by verification of information within the article. So you get this kind of concept of a cloud of context and review events accruing that give you a better sense of the veracity of the work, much better than it would be in a single in a single judgment by three peer reviewers, which is made at one point in time very early in the life of the article. So what we aspire to is the idea of an open ecosystem shown in the left panel. So author writes a paper, submits to a preprint server, Starchive, and I credit Ramin with the concept of Starchive, but that could be bioRxiv, medRxiv, archive, any one of a number of kind of community-based, largely discipline-specific preprint servers. It goes out into the world, and then different forms of evaluation occur downstream. It could be traditional journals, it could be independent peer review services, it could be services that just look at one specific aspect of the manuscript, like statistics or the veracity of a protein structure. And that, again, so these articles then accrue trust signals, commenting, etc. But the key aspect here is that that system is completely open and it's not prescribed in any way by the preprint server where the manuscript is hosted. But this is the caution, and that I think that's where we're going with things like archive, medRxiv, bioRxiv, etc. But we have to be really, really careful because there's an alternative future in which the commercial publishers react to what we're doing and do something slightly different. What they want to do is they want to preserve the prestige signaling of their journals. They want to create walled gardens which keep researchers inside so that they can monetize them. And in this case, what happens is the publisher creates their own publisher preprint server, keeps the manuscript in their silo, and then all they do is filter it down a hierarchy of journals so that you end up within that kind of commercial silo and they monetize it at the end. So I think we want to do everything we can to ensure that we create that open future described on the left. Thank you very much.